Welcome to Humble Beginnings, a podcast where we uncover the unconventional, more relatable paths to success. In this show, we'll share the stories before the C-suites, board memberships, and appointments, the stories of various upbringings, first jobs, career pivots, educational uncertainties, and more. This is the place to hear about their lives from the GovCon executives themselves. We hope you enjoy. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Humble Beginnings. I'm your host, Amanda Ziede, and joining me today is Bob Lohfeld, CEO of Sev1Tech. Thank you so much for being here today, Bob.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited.
Of course, me too. So, Bob, tell me a bit about your upbringing in Maryland and what your family was like.
Yeah, so I'm local. I've been local here my whole life to the National Capital Region. I grew up in what used to be Darnestown. It's now North Potomac. I think it got the housing prices up after we moved out. But my parents, one was from Ohio and the other one was from Seabrook, Maryland, right? Sort of that Lanham area. So both my parents went to Catholic University. That's how they met. And they decided to settle here in the nation's capital simply because of the diversity, the opportunity, and all the potential that raising children here in Maryland, D.C., Virginia offers if you take the area up on it, if you will. So I went to Good Counsel High School in Wheaton, later went to Mount St. Mary's in Maryland and did my master's in University of Maryland, University College. But my whole upbringing here really was special. You grew up in the National Capital Region. Diversity is just in our DNA. In my neighborhood growing up, we had a family from Pakistan, a family from Germany, a Chinese neighbor next door, and on the other side, French and French African. So you grew up in this world where you simply accepted people on what they brought to the table or what they brought to the potluck, either way. But it was just a wonderful upbringing in culture. And my parents, who both worked really hard to get where they were, kind of instilled that on myself and my sister, which is, nobody's going to do it for you. And there may be smarter people around, but you can always outwork them, right? And if you want something, you got to work to get it. So from the time I was 14, I was working on a horse farm. I did concrete in my 16, 17, 18 years and retaining walls. And the mantra in my family was work hard, play hard. But if you want something, work for it and go get it. And that followed my entire career. And I think between the compassion of how do you help people around you and the work ethic of nobody's going to do it for you, it really created sort of a special first 20 years for me.
Awesome. Wonderful. That's a great little overview. Thank you for sharing. I wanted to go back a bit. I know you worked a lot growing up. Were you involved in any other extracurriculars, maybe some fun ones while you were in school? Or?
Yeah, so my dad was a phenomenal athlete. He was a Maryland All-State pole vaulter and played football, basketball, and everything. I was more of a Dungeons and Dragons kid. So I was a swimmer, most people consider that a sport, but athletics was really not my thing. I grew up with a love of music. My mother was an actress and did local dinner theater here in Maryland, D.C., Virginia for my whole upbringing. So between her love for Motown, Broadway, my dad, sort of the CCR classic rock guy, everything for me was music. So in high school, I was in a rock band. I just loved music, whether it was reggae, whether it was world beat, whether it was EDM and techno, which I'm still a huge connoisseur of today, or just plain old-fashioned singer-songwriter music. Music has probably been the dominant theme for me more than anything else. I play the clarinet, I play the guitar. I'm a percussionist still with Latin percussion and African percussion. Kind of picked that up as a kid and just absolutely love it. But music has been more of a theme for me than sports. And even today, I'm a huge karaoke nut. So
that's awesome. So music's still with you today?
Absolutely.
Well, really cool. I also wanted to go back to a bit of your education background. I understand that you had a bit of a pivot. You initially went to the University of Dayton and then made the switch. So tell us a bit what that was about.
Yeah, so, we're all a product, I believe, of not just who our parents are, but the area we grew up in. I'm an East Coast boy. I grew up in D.C. where it was very clear from my upbringing is there's good people, bad people, no matter where they come from, what they look like, race, gender, preference, what they do on weekends, really doesn't matter. It's how they treat the people around them through their actions, not through their talk. So at the time, I really thought I wanted an experience to go far away. I had family in Ohio, in Youngstown, and I wanted to try a big school, which I figured out I'm not a big school guy. And I went to the University of Dayton, and it was definitely a different culture. Not being a huge sports guy, not being used to being in a class of 200. Everybody has different ways they learn. And for me, those interpersonal connections and sort of going a level deeper than the curriculum in a smaller class setting just worked better more for my learning style. So after I spent a year there, I kind of told my parents that this isn't going to work out. It doesn't feel like what I'm used to culturally, and also from an academic perspective. So I knew at that point, even though my parents told me I was a small school kid and I was sworn to be a large school kid, that a small school was right for me. And when I found Mount St. Mary's, and read through all their curriculum, I went on campus, and it's weird. You can go to a school and like it, or you can go to a school and it feels like home. And for me, being in the mountains, being in a class of 20 people or less was just such an amazing experience. One of the professors that I got really close with was a Cuban gentleman who taught my international political studies work. And he and his sister were on the last L-1011 out of Cuba before the fall of the revolution. So when you get to know some of these professors and you get to go over for black beans and rice and really talk about what freedom means and have these deeper conversations with folks at that level, it just made a huge impact on who I am today. And some of the fundamentals of the school and what they expect of humanity, like taking classes on world religions, right? It's not in everyone's curriculum. But when you understand that every religion's trying to do the same thing, right, which is, keep people being good people, right, and how sometimes that works and sometimes it gets perverted, it really gives you a different perspective. So for me, the Mount really gave me a perspective on how to be a good human first, and then how to be smart in something second. And I think that kind of carried me through, has carried me through my career back to those values of what does it mean to really connect with people, and how can you get them to be more. So
awesome. And I do have a question about growing up and role models in your life, but I wanted to know, I grew up in Frederick, Maryland, and we visited the Mount all the time for various reasons, and we graduated, we had a graduation there. It's a beautiful campus, so I can completely understand why going there would feel homey, and great campus. And it's fun to meet someone who went there because, ironically, not that many people from high school would go to the Mount. So,
no, we have a lot of people from New Jersey.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Understood. Yeah.
And I did my master's at Maryland, which I jumped right back into the setting that I left. But what I found is when I did my master's at Maryland as a student and as a learner, I was better at studying on my own without the interaction after doing 4 years of undergrad. And I sort of made my way through that program. And I loved the University of Maryland University College program because it was taught by a lot of practitioners. And for me, I'm not really as interested in just reading the theory in the book. I'm much more about how's it applied in the field. And a lot of their professors were able to bring that insight. So loved my University of Maryland days, but had I started there, I probably would have failed out because, being in a class of 500 versus being in a master's class of 15, I'm more the latter.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, that makes sense. But as you were talking about, these values and the things that are important to you, I remember you kind of discussing some role models growing up, your grandmother in particular, and the values they instilled in you. So how do you carry with these values with you also throughout life?
Yeah. So growing up, my family was very matriarchal. My great grandmother, who was born in 1898, who lost her big toe when a horse and carriage dropped on her foot, having gone through the Great Depression, having gone through the Roaring '30s, having gone through the '60s and the hippie movement, she was fascinating. And my grandmother, not my great grandmother, my grandmother grew up as a very progressive professional woman. So in the 50s, it was not as common for women to be in a factory on a circuit line doing engineering. My love for electronics stems from my grandmother because she'd always save spare parts and stuff that they were throwing out. And I think when I was 6, she taught me how to use a soldering iron. What my grandmother instilled in me is it doesn't matter sex, race, gender, where you came from. It's how you want to apply your brain and are you true to yourself in what you're doing. If you don't love it, you're wasting your life. And that was sort of her message. Her other message was money doesn't matter because you can't take it with you, but you will never have enough money to buy time. So whatever you do, make sure it counts. So I always had this little beating drum in the back of my head going, do I love what I'm doing today? And is this worth the energy that I'm putting into it? So that had a pretty profound effect, especially in high school when I started to get my act together and start thinking about college. What did I really want to do? And where did I really want to make an impact? I think having grandparents coming from humble beginnings makes a big impact on the next 2 generations. You don't take anything for granted. I still remember my parents when we went to Ocean City, the first time I could remember it, going, oh my God, a video game's a quarter. What else could we do with that quarter, right? You guys want to play $10 worth of video games, we could go buy lunch. There was always this sense of it doesn't matter how much money you have, it's how responsible you spend it. And I think that sort of stuck with me, the rest of my career as well. But my grandmother is always in my back of my mind of how I treat people, how I spend my own time, and whether or not I'm enabling people to do what they want to do, and in a way that makes it fulfilling for them as well. So huge impact in my life. Miss her to death. So it's a great lady.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. Kind of segues nicely into, I'm curious as to why you chose to study international political science in undergrad and international commerce and law in grad school. So I'm curious if you were always interested in these studies or if you were influenced anyhow.
Yeah. So growing up and working, the horse farm was kind of more of a manual labor job. But when I got into doing retaining walls and doing concrete, I worked with a lot of Latin Americans. And I fell in love, really with the Salvadorian culture, the Mexican culture, even the Ecuadorian culture. And I was bilingual by the time I was probably 15, maybe 16, I would say. Because on my summer jobs, half the people spoke English, half the people didn't. And what I always appreciated was the work ethic and being with people who realize your value isn't just the paycheck. Your value is what you contributed and what you can see at the end of the day that you did. That was pretty profound. So in high school, one of my best friends was half Peruvian and half Spanish, which if you follow those cultures are very different. And growing up with sort of a multicultural set of friends, I always loved international culture, international cuisine, international people, because I thought it was just so fascinating, right? You really don't realize how small you are until you travel all around the world. And my parents, when I went to school at the Mount, there was a wonderful program in Mexico on liberation theology and how Christianity was brought to the international or to the indigenous populations, which both has really great things and really horrible things about how that all happened. And I was so curious about it. I took a semester and studied in Southwest Mexico and the state of Morelos. And I fell in love again with just these folks that were so different based on where they had grown up, based on what their cultural norms were. And to me, it was just always fascinating. So fast forward, then I did a semester in London, which was amazing as well at London School of Economics. And again, just being exposed to different people who had such a different perception of what life was and how life was. I'm still in love with it today. So when I started and I went into international political systems and economics, the game plan was, and I had a double minor in economics and Spanish, was I was going to move to Spain. I was going to eat fresh oranges the rest of my life. I was going to move like somewhere like Valencia, run an international operation, and enjoy having dual citizenship. But my senior year, I fell in love with my wife, who kind of changed the way things went from there, and decided I was going to do international commerce and law, so that maybe after I got married, I'd go do something international. But then life happens, and next thing you know, you're still in Virginia 30 years later, and you have great vacations, but you never moved overseas.
There's still time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's very interesting, and I love hearing how travel and experiencing different cultures impacts people. I think it's really important.
Yeah, especially some of the places that are very different, right? So, like North Coast of Africa, right? It's a very different upbringing and what you even expect when you wake up versus today. Even if you go into former Eastern Germany cities versus someone living in Barcelona, right? They wake up with a totally different idea of what a normal day is. Um, and quite frankly, we have that here in the U.S., right? I think one of the best trips I ever did with my kids, is we took 2 weeks and drove across the U.S. And when you look at what's normal in the morning in, say, Oklahoma, in terms of traffic, in terms of breakfast, in terms
Yeah.
of just what's going on, versus San Diego, right? Versus Boston. You really learn that the U.S. has all of these little micro uh, cultures inside of it that have a very different daily reality, right? I mean, we've got 15 offices around the U.S., and what's normal in Louisiana, what's normal in Charleston, and what's normal in Aberdeen, Maryland, is very different. And there's wonderful things about all of them, so it's kind of cool.
Yeah, very true. And it's a big country. When you compare it to other parts of the world, it makes sense why, you can go from coast to coast and it be vastly different. So
I'll never forget driving through Utah, and it said next exit 78 miles. I was like, oh my God, 78 miles? Like
78 miles.
that's like 17, 18 exits at home, right? I
Right,
it was
right.
like,
There's one every
wow.
half mile.
I
Yeah.
guess you really have to check if you have gas, right?
Yep. Pray that a tire doesn't pop.
Big signs, stop here if you need fuel. So it's a big country.
It is a big country, but those are very cool experiences and very cool that your kids got to experience that at a young age too. That's pretty awesome. All right. So, how did your post grad career actually start in international logistics? How did it actually play out? And what did that first job experience kind of teach you?
Really blessed out of school. The Bolt family, I think he probably had like 17 kids. I don't know. There were a lot of Bolts. And a lot of them went to Mount St. Mary's. And Richard Bolt had a company called BDP International, which was an international logistics company. And every year they'd pull a poli-sci major and an accounting major, and they'd bring them into the company. And I was the poli-sci major. So I went to Baltimore. I was in Linthicum, which is famous for the G&M crab cakes. That's about it. And they're still great today. But in 1993, the job market kind of sucked. And it was, okay, what are we going to do here? And I decided, you know what, I'll try international logistics. So I decided right away I wanted to get my master's, and I did that right out of school. I never stopped because I knew once I stopped, I would not go back. So I kept that up. And after about 2 years, I moved to a company called Circle International, where I got to work in Spanish. And my job was supporting the national mining company of Chile, which was called Codelco. And having worked in Spanish, both speaking and writing every day to people that were, 100 miles beneath the earth on VAX terminals that needed everything from grinding wheels to boots to flashlights, I was doing international export, helping them bring all that and buy it in the U.S. and ship it down to all these different 7 mines in Chile. And again, fell in love with the culture of the people, even though I couldn't be with them physically. So I knew at that point that I'd finished my degree in international commerce. I got a call from American Management Systems at the time, and they said, hey, you're kind of a weird guy. You're in international shipping. You have a master's degree, and international commerce and law. And we understand you know how to run a 20-ton forklift. I'm like, yeah, because we load containers at night, right? I thought everyone worked 18 hours a day, like 12 in the office, 6 at night loading containers is a great way to break in your career. Because after that, working 14 hours a day seemed easy. But my heart goes out to everyone in the freight forwarding and customs brokerage business. It's real 24/7. So I decided that at that point, I was going to become a consultant. And AMS at the time was just a wonderful organization. They're now CGI, they were bought. But when I worked for them, I worked in their industrial and utilities consulting. And they said, how'd you like to become an IT guy? And I said, if it's challenging. At this point, I'd started building the reputation towards running towards the fires. Because that, again, do what you love, work hard, and do what other people say you can't do. And they're like, well, make an IT guy. So I did some work for the Navy. I did some work for the Army, a little bit for the Air Force. And next thing I knew, I was doing Siebel back in the day in customer relationship management and doing configurations. And I started to become an IT nerd. And that sort of led me to one thing to another. And next thing you know, I was working at US Internetworking in Annapolis back in the day, running data centers and building data centers and crushing them. Simply because the projects were just cerebrally interesting. They were hard. They were about details. They were about process. They were about bringing out the best in people. And that type of technical program management becomes addicting if you really are into what you're doing. Then I went to Project Performance Corp, started a data center relocation practice, did that for a bunch of years, and then fell in love with DHS and ended up working there as both a contractor, then later a Fed. Just sort of anywhere there was stuff that was either impossible, hard to do, or where you could really make a difference was where I always tried to point my career.
That's cool. I want to go back to what you said about running towards the fire. Where do you think this mentality and approach to work and maybe even outside of work, where do you think that came from for you?
So I'd like to not go deep, but I will because it's really what is behind it. I think if when you come home, whatever home looks like, whether you win, lose, succeed, or fail, you will be loved. It gives you a different perspective on life. And whether that was my parents or my best friend and wife, now married 25 years, I never had anything other than go try something, because as long as we have each other, it'll be okay. And I had that even as a kid growing up. No matter what I did, I'd always come home and at the end of the day, I'd get a hug after I got in trouble. But I think that's sort of the foundation of it. So as a practitioner in IT, it's very easy to get lazy. It's very easy to do what you know and still collect a good check, right? But that was never enough for me. It was, am I making a difference, right? And from an early age in my career, I realized that if I don't create growth, right, even as an IT practitioner, there's no way I can advance the lives of my team. And that sort of drove me to do things that other people said couldn't be done. Data center consolidation, I used to be able to work 4 days straight, 3 days straight. Now I'm 52. So like after 24 hours, I need a nap. I'm going to bed. But I used to go, I used to start a data center consolidation on Friday at noon and not finish till Sunday at 8 and move 10, 20, 30,000 square feet of data center back up running applications and everything. And it was just such a mental challenge and a physical challenge. I just fell in love with it. But I would have never taken the kind of risks I did in my career if I didn't have something in the back of my head saying, no matter what happens, if you take a risk and you don't succeed, that's okay. Figure out what you did and go fix it. And I think just having that foundation of love in my personal life made a big difference as to how I perceived what other people thought was a risk and what I thought was an opportunity to really prove somebody wrong. Right? And that's sort of what influenced it.
Awesome. That's a lovely note on support. It's great to have that support at home. Yeah. So tell me about, speaking of making a difference, your time as a Fed. Why did you choose to transition into government for a bit? And what was that experience like in terms of, the journey of your career?
So at the time when I was serving as a contractor back at CBP, it was in the days of Charlie Armstrong and Chief Aguilar. And if you've ever met Chief Aguilar or Armstrong, very different personalities, but one thing's common. Everything they do is about the mission, how it affects the mission, what it does to the mission. And for someone like me, that's intoxicating because when you're sitting and have the privilege to be in an office and you're not out on the front line carrying a gun, if you're not in harm's way, it gives you a very clear line to your responsibility to those people every day you get in the office. And for me, having always been on the consulting side and not a direct member of the mission, but still a member of the mission because without us, they couldn't do what they do. I fell in love with CBP. I was blessed that at the time Lorraine Landfried was there. She later went on to VA. Probably one of the best people I've ever worked for, and would just challenge you and also have your back. So when I saw the right chemistry of leadership between Armstrong, Lorraine Landfried, and some of the others, they approached me with becoming a GSer. So I was the deputy director of data center operations with Jeff Baer, who was my senior, and we just ran it like a business. I was 38 years old, 5 branch chiefs, 360 people, and it was a lot of responsibility, but I loved every minute I served that mission, both as a contractor when I consolidated their data centers and as a Fed. And at the end of the day in government, I think even more so in industry, who you work for, if you're a pusher, if you're a watcher, you can work anywhere, collect a check and go. But if you're a pusher like me that wants to make change, who's in those top boxes really matters because they either give you the cover to do what's right for the mission or they tell you to go back to your office, get some paper clips and some paper and, paint pretty pictures. And that makes a big difference as a federal employee. Who you work for matters because if they don't push, there's no way you're going to push. And when I mean push to do what's right for the folks on the front line. And the one thing about working for Chief Aguilar and working for Armstrong is they never let you forget that. And they held you accountable every day to deliver. And to me, those are my favorite kind of feds. They're actually still my favorite. My favorite customers today are still the ones that we call them pushers. People that are not going to go to bed at night with just okay. They're going to go to bed every night going, what else can I do for those men and women that are out there, in this case, protecting the country? I still get emotional about it now because I absolutely loved working there as a contractor and a Fed. And, but, at the end of the day, it's who's in those top boxes and what's their priorities. And if their priorities are the people in the field over other things, those are the best customers in the world.
Awesome. And it's great to know what it's like to be the customer, I'm sure.
Yeah, so it gave me a lot of perspective when I started the company because I had operated contracts instead of being the contractor. I had to provide, leadership both on both sides of the contractor and the government, and doing things at scale really made a difference as well. So even today, having that balance between, how the contractor may view something and how the government may view something, it's still very helpful.
Well, let's get into a little bit about your decision to start Sev1Tech. I'm always very intrigued by entrepreneurship because it just seems like one of those daunting, one day I'll do that decisions. So how did that come about and were you always interested?
So I failed twice before this one. This one's worked out really well. But back to the aspect of love at home. My first company, I had a tractor business as a hobby business, and it did absolutely horrible. I learned don't take your hobby and try to make money on it if you're a full-time 50-hour-a-week IT guy. Instead, just play with your own tractor. Don't try to sell them, fix them. So that one was horrible. My second one, I started a IT consolidation company. It grew to one employee, me. And I only had it open 4 months, and a friend of mine called and said, hey, we need help. We want a big contract. We need somebody to run it. I can't have you do it as a subcontractor. I am back to my grandmother, and always remember who helped you in your career and make sure you pay that back. Um, you know, it sort of stuck with me. So I actually shut the company down after 4 months and went to become a full-time employee at PPC, because the guy there, Bob Darlington at the time, had really helped me grow as a consultant when I was at AMS 10 years earlier. So when I started Sev1Tech, imagine having two companies that cost a lot more money than they ever made, going home to your wife and being like, hey, number three is going to be a charm. The driver for me was, at the time I was 38, there were 360 people in our group. But things had changed. My SES had gone over to VA. There were some positions open up in the SES world, and I just wasn't ready for that. At 38, I still wanted to be in the technology. I didn't necessarily, while I could do policy, I wasn't necessarily a policy person. Again, you don't tend to have fires around policy. You definitely have fires around IT. So I said, okay, this is probably not a fit for me. So I went home to my wife, and I still remember telling this joke of, hey, I think I'm going to start a company and I'm going to leave federal service. And she's like, well, I'm pregnant. She was pregnant with my son. And she's like, I'm pregnant. I said, don't worry, baby. Gravity will bring the kid. We're good. We'll figure out health insurance along the way. I thought it was hysterical. It clearly was not hysterical. So after I cleaned that up after about an hour, she's like, look, if you want to do it, go for it. And I'm like, worst comes to worst, I'll be another one-person company, and I'll go and do data center consolidation until my bones fall off, right? Which, at 38, I was still good. If you told me that today, I'd be like, you know what, I'll do a part-time. So I ended up going in and telling the boss, I love this mission, I love this organization, but I'm too young to do anything else other than what I'm doing now, and I really think I want to get back into IT. So I withdrew from the SES candidacy process, and I withdrew from the agency, and I founded Sev1Tech. And I had a big business plan to do $300,000 worth of work my first year, and we did $1 million. My second year, I had a business plan that said we'd do $1 million. We did $3 million. My third year, I said we'd do $3 million. We did $10 million. And 14 years later, we're a $250 million company. But what has never changed about us is those core values of mission before money and people before profit. Because at the end of the day, I'm not here as an executive to collect nuts. I'm here to grow enough nuts so that everybody eats. And that has been kind of a foundational element that makes us different in the way we operate. Is, we can find customers easier than we can find really good people who share our values, that will do whatever it takes to make the mission successful. And we will always be able to find pushers in the government who appreciate that and watchers that don't. So let's build a company around the pushers who want to make a difference and really show them how we can outwork everyone else to do it faster and to put a better solution in place. And that's our DNA. I mean, we're still a culture of hugging, and we're at 1,000 people, which is really weird for people to hug at a company at all. But we're like a bunch of huggers, because of connectivity, the connectedness to us is even more important than the communication. Do you know you belong? And more importantly, do you know that the reason you belong is because you are actually performing at a level that we need you to perform, right? And that by doing that, it makes you special. And that's sort of our DNA, even at 1,000 people now. We're 1,007 people. So we were at like 950 for a long time. It drove me crazy. But now we're finally at 1,007. And we spend a lot of time on culture that other companies don't. So it's not, I'll never be a publicly traded company, because that's kind of not aligned with, someone who's got publicly traded stock. But it is definitely aligned with, back to my grandmother, what are you doing to give back? Because you can't take it with you, right? What does a life that means something really translate to? And in my case, I've been able to make a rising tide that has lifted a ton of ships with it over the last 14 years. And, I'm just really blessed that so far, knock on wood, the values that we don't talk about, but we put into motion in every decision we make our customers better, make our employees better, and always make a difference.
Awesome. It's clear
This is
to
the best
see.
job I've had. I've stayed here the longest. So.
And it's a success. I mean, the growth you've seen in 14 years is extremely impressive. And I love structuring the podcast this way because there's a million ways to tell someone's story. But when you start with the upbringing and what you kind of carried throughout your life, it's very clear to see what you've put into the company and the values that you started it with and that remain today. So
I'm just glad we didn't have to talk about my Huffy bicycle and the spring-loaded seat because that was quite an adventure as well.
Well, now I want to talk about that.
Yeah, no, everybody starts as a kid. That's what I remind everybody. Right? We all start as a kid.
Okay, that's for part 2. We'll get into that next time. Bob, is there any other ideologies or values that you started the company with that we've discussed that you want to make sure we've talked about them, but anything else you want to include?
So I think we're at an interesting time, and not just because of COVID, but because where we are with technology, we stand to do a lot of great things and lose ourselves along the way. And let me give you an example of that. So ChatGPT is wonderful. I use it in my daily work life, but I'm very judicious of how I use it. So let's say I'm putting together an email around a problem to somebody. And let's say I just don't like the situation or I'm angry, right? I can go to ChatGPT and say, take this email and make it friendly. And then I send it to someone who probably goes it and is just as frustrated as I am and says, okay, I'm going to ChatGPT him back with a friendly response, right? In lieu of, let's have a clear as kind conversation, right? Where, it used to be a telephone, then it was a cell phone, then it was Teams, and now it's text. So we're creating this culture where you cannot be true to yourself for the simplicity of an easy way out. And I think that's very dangerous. So I have a rule, you can only text me 2 times and then I'll call you, right? Because I'm not going to do it. I want to hear your voice. I want the cues, your physical cues. I want some empathy in the conversation. I get optimistic on what we can do to accelerate processes, on what we can do to accelerate technology. But I don't want us to lose the human empathy and the importance of direct dialogue through the process. And when I look at the way some of the folks behave on social media with, hey, I'm going to selfie myself every 5 minutes so that somebody else can tell me I'm important so I have self-worth, that's a horrible paradigm for us as an American culture. The same thing on TikTok. And instead of having a meaningful conversation or going and practicing a sport or, in my case, studying for my pilot's license, I'm going to go on TikTok and watch cat videos. Well, that's very, very entertaining. But when you start adding up how much you're looking at crap every day, right? What else could you be doing with that time? In long term, if everybody's looking at cat videos, I'm not picking on cats just because I'm a dog person, but there are some cat videos out there. But if I choose to spend my time trying to collect attention and choose to spend my time looking at things that really don't make me better as a person or any smarter, I worry about where that takes culture long term. I love educational videos on YouTube. I've learned to do many things on YouTube, whether it be wiring an electric box or, fixing a TV. But I worry about the other content of what are the kids getting out of that. My kids grew up with, they only get an hour of screen time a day. It's a little harder to enforce now that they're in college and a senior in high school. But that was our policy because our deal was the world's out there. You're not going to find it in a little sheet of glass. So it's kind of interesting. So I'm in IT. I'm in the middle of making everything faster and the infrastructure, making the applications better, making the science better around it with our digital twinning stuff and our AI. But I just don't want to be at the expense of what I believe has always made the American people the people who we are, which is our ability to connect, empathize, and to have meaningful dialogue at a state, local, and a country level. So a little deep, but
Yeah, no, yeah, no, that speaks well to the, the way that we are, the state of the world right now. So it's important to
I'm doing
know.
everything to try to change it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you're studying for your pilot license, but what's next for you? What are you working towards? And it can be in Sev1Tech or outside.
Yeah. So on my own personal journey, my parents, especially my dad, has always been someone who's been a learner. And having that mantra of you can always outwork them even if they're smarter by doing more research, learning more, and doing more. I try to do something every year in January that puts me out of my comfort zone. So I am a justice of the peace for Shenandoah County in the state of Virginia. I do marriages. That was 1 year. I also am a certified sustainable logger. I got that certification as well. Um, and I also plant corn. I plant about 10 acres of sweet corn a year. I work on industrial equipment. I have excavators and bulldozers and do construction work. I try to pick something every year that teaches me a new skill so that my synapses inside my brain continue to spark, arc, and make different pathways. This year, I chose I was going to become a pilot. So I will get my pilot's license here in February. I've already done all my solos. And my next step is to get instrument rated and multi-engine rated. And that will actually be in 24. I think flying is going to keep me busy all the way through 24. I don't know what's next. But every year I get a new cert or a new hobby. Oh, that's the other thing. I also paint. So I paint as well. So I do landscapes and I do modern art.
Wow,
So
where do you find the time?
So it's an interesting question, right? So one thing about high performing folks, not the ones that talk about it, but the ones actually show that they have a high output, right? Because a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm so busy," but then you look at what they actually did, and you're like, "Okay, you did email, text, and watch cats videos." Um, for
It's
the
most of
folks
us.
that are really pushing, right? There's always an outlet, and it's an outlet that usually allows them to recharge. I have one friend, he'll tell you his outlet is having big barbecues where he's just social and doesn't talk about work. I have another friend who runs a large company and he hunts, right? Oh, that's the other thing. I'm a hunter too. So I got my hunting license about 7 years ago, 8 years ago. So I do that. But the idea is that I spend the majority of my time using my energy to push something forward. How you recoup that as an individual is very different. For me, I'm an extrovert during the week and I'm an introvert on weekends. So like for me, can I go to a big, conference or can I go to, a big kind of happy hour type thing? Those are a lot of energy for me, right? 5 people over dinner, love it, small group. But on weekends, most of my hobbies are by myself. Running an excavator, running a bulldozer, flying a plane, doing forestry out there with my chainsaw. They're time for me to re-energize, think, and get back and ready for the next week. And I think the more honest you can be with yourself of what provides a recharge, right? And have that conversation with whatever your family looks like, right? Whether it be your friends, whether it be a boyfriend, girlfriend, spouse, whether it be a neighbor, and having them understand that, I think it's really healthy. Because my wife and I recharge very differently. But I'll be like, hey, I need to go out for the next 4 hours and just rip trees down.
Yeah.
Then I'll be back, right? It's fantastic. So
That's productive. Very
yeah,
cool.
so I don't know what 25 will be, but this year it's going to be instrument rated flying and multi engine.
Very cool. Well, Bob, this has been a really fascinating conversation, and I've really enjoyed learning about you and the things that drive you. I wanted to close on something else that I know is important to you: diversity in leadership and mentorship. So, if you want to talk, about how this plays a role in your life, and then also maybe provide some last minute advice for rising leaders, that'd be
Sure.
awesome.
So diversity is a fascinating topic for me because in government you get no credit for it. So everyone talks about diversity, but as a contractor, when you're bidding, you really don't get any credit for having diversity within your organization. And I'll give you an example. You can have an 8A where the owner's a minority, but everybody else is non-minority in the company, and they still get credit. I have almost 50%, 40 to 50% minorities in my company, and I don't get anything, right? So sometimes we talk about things, but we don't really think about the alignment. Like, why wouldn't we say in government contracting that having a company with 50% minorities or more actually constitutes a great thing for the government and a great thing for bringing up the entire community instead of select individuals? Now, when I was a small business, my wife is Mohawk Indian and she's a woman. We didn't use woman-owned. We didn't use Mohawk Indian. We just used plain old small business because we knew we'd get large and we wanted to fight the whole way. But what was never on the table for me was race, preference, diversity. Growing up, the son of an engineer and an actress, I saw every type of relationship you could see under the sun. But it was always, are they good people, right? With the international upbringing in Maryland, DC, Virginia, I didn't know any different, that there were communities where a different color or a different type of speech was really seen as a divider. So, I have a saying that I've used for the last 30 years, which is I only value people by the space between their ears. Because at the end of the day, it's the space in your ears and how you take your heart into action that really define you as a person. I mean, if you've ever been in a meeting with someone that talks about themselves in the third person and tells you how wonderful they are, and you're going, Jesus, nobody wants to work for you, right? Right? It's so unself-aware. Yeah. I've worked really hard to keep that out of any culture that's around me, whether personally or professionally. It's people are people, right? We as leaders have a responsibility to recognize everyone's talent and to promote them only because of that, right? Now, my management team is half women and minorities, but I didn't have a plan to say I'm going to get minorities in here. What I did is I said, this is what the performance requirement is. And if you can hit it, I'm going to do nothing other than give you a chance. And our DNA is built around space between your ears. You'll hear my PM say it. You'll hear my visit, I had a guy probably 10 years ago say, well, if you make me work for that 27-year-old, I'm going to quit. And I said, well, if you need help with your resume, let me know. And he looked at me and goes, well, I'm a senior engineer. And I said, and you're a great engineer, but people don't like working with you. If you want to be a leader in this organization, right, you got to figure out how to work with non-engineers. And he's like, well, why does this person get the position? And I said, I'm going to tell you something that nobody else will. She's 27 and she's better than you at building teams. And your next position in your career is a team. So if you want to quit because you're 57 working for a 27-year-old, have at it. But if you want to get better, work at it. And still with the company today. So having those I'm a huge Brene Brown fan, so clear is kind, unclear is unkind. But for me, diversity has just always been a part of my life. And I have zero tolerance for anybody who doesn't respect that. I just wish the government got smarter and gave us credit for it, because too often we're using set-aside dollars to make a few people really rich instead of bring a whole community or group of people up. And that's what I've really tried to focus on.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a lovely note to end on. Bob, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, your values, and a bit about the company and what you still cherish today. So I really appreciate it.
It's been an amazing journey, the best place I've ever worked. And I come into work every day and love with the people that I work with. So I can't complain. But Amanda, thank you so much for the opportunity. You've been wonderful, and really look forward to anything you want to do in the future.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Do you know an executive in GovCon with a humble beginning? We'd love to share their story. Shoot us an email telling us a bit about them, and maybe one day you'll hear them on Humble Beginnings. You can reach us at media@WashingtonExec.com.